So next topic which we are going to take in oceanography is temperature. What is temperature? How the temperatures are going to affect the ocean and the marine organism. Why we have to detect the temperature first of all? Temperatures are important because we have to examine that whether the marine organism can stay in that temperature or not. For example, what is the optimal temperature for any fishing zone? The optimal temperature for any fishing zone is 18 to 21 degree, right? It should lie in between this only, because too much of extreme cold or too much of extreme hotness is detrimental for the sustenance of the marine organism. Therefore, what we need the optimal temperature should be maintained in between this. Therefore, where the cold currents and the hot currents are meeting, that is the intersection point. For example, Newfound Island. In Newfound Island, that is a place where the hot current and cold current, right? Basically, this is your how your hot current goes from the equator to the poles, and the cold current comes from poles to equator. So this is cold current. Okay. So hot current and cold current. So this is how they are placed. And when hot current and cold current meets, this is the intersection point. When they meet, this is the optimal place for the fishing. Lot of fishes are found here and other marine organism. Not only that, the continental shelf is very nutrient rich. Why? Because the fishes are here, right? So lot of organic material is found here. So this is how we have to determine why the temperature and examining the temperature of the ocean is extremely important for us, right? Apart from that, you also have to study about the study of temperatures of the ocean is important for determining three things. What are those three things? First is movement of large volumes of water, whether it is vertical or horizontal, type and distribution of marine organism, and climate of the coastal lands. Another thing which I want to focus on is how the temperature of the ocean differs. For example, this is the upper layer. So this is the upper layer, which we call it as surface. This is a surface. The layer after that is known as subsurface. This is known as subsurface. So subsurface and surface. When the subsurface is having what? Cold temperature. Why cold? Because the rays of the sun are falling on the upper portion. There is a particular depth after which the sun rays or the sunlight cannot penetrate deep inside the ocean. So automatically this will become cold, right? This is one of the reasons. But on the upper surface, the direct sun rays are falling on the surface. Therefore, the temperature of this area is rising up. Since the temperature of this area is rising up, the upper portion tends to be hotter, the lower portion is colder, right? Since the cold water is denser, always remember, the cold water is denser, and when something is denser or something is having a more density, it will sink down. Therefore, the cold water also sinks down, right? Therefore, it is always below the hot water, right? And that is how it moves, okay? Another factor that you need to examine is the oxygen in the cold water is more, always. Oxygen level or oxygen quantity is always going to be more in the cold water. This has been a lot of there has been a lot of question on this topic in PYQs, also in prelims and the mains. So understand it conceptually. Okay, so the oxygen is always going to be more in this kind of water. When oxygen is more, then what will happen? It is a good for sustenance. Okay. Now, how the cold water and hot water mixes up, right? So cold water and hot water, they do not always stay like that. Okay, this is hot water and this is cold water, or you can take it as subsurface water and this is surface water. Now these two water level, these two water difference, what we have taken as a different water levels, they tend to mix up. How they mix up? How they mixes up? They mix up through upwelling and downwelling. Upwelling and downwelling. What is upwelling? Upwelling is nothing but the cold water tends to mix up and go on the upper surface. So the hot water will automatically become cold, right? There's a mixing, there's a churning happening in the surface level. When the churning is happening at the surface level, the cold water will definitely automatically come from the upper surface and it will also make it hot and it mixes up. It moderates the temperature of the ocean, right? That is important to understand, right? And also, this is a vertical thing that we have discussed, okay? And also always remember, whenever the water is stagnant, okay, there are two kinds of water which are always moving and the one is stagnant. One is always moving will always have a moderate kind of temperature. Why? Because if this becomes very, very hot or insolation is more, but there is the water which is coming from far away and this water is colder, right? So they tends to mix up. These tends to mix up. Since it mixes up, then what will not happen? They will, hot and cold water will mix and it will make a moderate kind of temperature, right?